At the height of her power, she commanded 70,000 pirates and 1,800 ships. The Chinese Empire sent its navy to destroy her and lost. The Portuguese tried. The British tried. None of them could stop her. They called her Zheng Yi Sa, and she may be the most successful pirate who ever lived. In the winter of 1810, the most feared naval power on the South China Sea did not belong to an emperor. It did not belong to a king or to any nation written into the history books you were handed in school. It belonged to a woman. A woman who, just 9 years earlier, had no surname worth recording. Someone the world had quietly filed away under the oldest and most forgotten profession there is. By the time she was finished, tens of thousands of men answered to her word. She commanded a fleet of hundreds of ships, by some accounts, well over 1,000. 3 empires tried to destroy her. All 3 failed. And then, at the very height of that power, she did the one thing almost no pirate in history ever managed to do. She stopped, on her own terms, and she lived to grow old. This is the story of Zheng Yi Sa, the pirate queen who beat the world and walked away from it. To understand how high she climbed, you first have to stand on the water where she began. Picture the city of Canton at the turn of the 19th century. Today we call it Guangzhou, where the Pearl River widens and loses itself in the sea. This was one of the busiest waterways on Earth. Tea, silk, and porcelain moved through it toward the whole world. And out on the river, lashed together in their hundreds, floated another city entirely, a city of boats. Among them drifted the flower boats, floating houses of pleasure, lit by paper lanterns that swayed all night on the black water. It is here, around the year 1775, that our story quietly begins. We do not know the name her mother gave her. History barely bothered to write it down. We know her only by the name she would earn much later, Zheng Yi Sa, which means, simply, the wife of Zheng Yi. Sit with that for a moment. The most powerful pirate the world has ever seen is remembered, even now, by a man's name. And yet she would eclipse every man who ever tried to own her. In 1801, that life on the flower boats ended, not because she was rescued, but because she was noticed. The man who noticed her was Zheng Yi, a successful, well-connected pirate from a long line of sea raiders. The simple version of the story says he took her as his wife. But the more interesting accounts, the ones that hint at who she really was, say she negotiated. She agreed to the marriage on a condition. She would not be a possession. She wanted an equal share, not only of the plunder, but of the power. From the very first day, she was never the prize. She was the partner, and it would turn out she had the sharper mind of the two. Together, they did something the pirates of the South China Sea had never quite done before. They stopped competing and started uniting. One by one, rival pirate bands were brought together into a single vast confederation, organized under colored banners: red, black, white, yellow, blue, green, each a fleet of its own. The largest by far flew the red flag. What had been scattered gangs of bandits became something that looked less like crime and more like a nation. A floating nation, with its own logic, its own discipline, its own borders drawn in salt water. At its height, this confederation may have numbered, by some counts, as many as 70 or 80,000 people, men, women, and children who lived, fought, married, and died on the decks of its ships. For a few short years, they were unstoppable. And then, the sea took the man at the center of it all. In 1807, Zheng Yi died, swept overboard, most accounts say, in a violent storm off the coast of Vietnam. In that world, the path for a pirate's widow was already written. She was meant to fade, to step back, to become, at best, a quiet figure in some captain's household, and at worst, nothing at all. Instead, within weeks, she moved. She understood something her rivals did not, that the fleet was not held together by fear, but by loyalty, and loyalty had to be claimed before it cooled. So she went, deliberately, to the most powerful captains, and she secured them, one by one. The most important of them was a young man named Qing, a fisherman's son her late husband had taken in years before and raised almost as an adopted son. She drew him close, first as her trusted lieutenant, and later as her husband. With him beside her and the captains behind her, she did not simply inherit her husband's fleet. She took command of it. And here is where you see the mind that set her apart. She did not rule by terror alone. She ruled by law. She imposed a strict code on tens of thousands of violent men, and she enforced it without exception. Give an order out of turn, or disobey a superior, and the punishment was death. Steal from the common treasury, or rob the villages that fed and supplied the fleet, and the punishment was death. And there was one law that still surprises people today. The women captured during raids were not to be abused. A pirate who harmed a female captive faced execution. If a man took a captive as a wife, he was bound to her, to remain faithful, and to care for her. Break that, and again, death. It was harsh. It was absolute. But it was also something a mob never has: order. And order is what turned a swarm of bandits into a discipline that no empire could match. Because empires did come. The Qing dynasty, the rulers of all China, sent their imperial navy to crush her. She did not merely slip away from them. She met them, and she beat them. She captured their warships and turned them against their former owners. Provincial fleets sailed out proud and came back broken, when they came back at all. So the empire looked beyond its borders. It hired Portuguese warships out of the colony at Macau. It sought the help of the British. The combined weight of an Asian empire and the great naval powers of Europe was turned against a single woman and her confederation of the sea. And still, they could not break her. At her peak, she did not just raid. She ruled. She blockaded ports. She taxed the coastal trade. She sold safe passage to merchants who wished to keep their cargo and their lives. Along great stretches of that coast, the emperor's word meant little. Hers meant everything. This is the moment her story turns from remarkable into something almost unique in all of history. Because pirate stories nearly always end the same way. A noose. A deck gone slick and red. A head raised on a spike as a warning to the next ambitious soul. Zheng Yi could see that ending coming for her, and she refused it. The pressure never stopped, and trouble grew from within. The great fleets that had once stood together began to turn on one another. The red and the black banners fell into open conflict. She was at the height of her power, and clear-eyed enough to know that no height lasts forever. The Qing government, exhausted by years of failure, made an offer instead of a threat: amnesty. A pardon. A way out. Most warlords, drunk on their own legend, would have spat on it. She studied it. In 1810, she did something audacious. She walked, by some accounts unarmed, accompanied by the wives and children of her captains, directly into the presence of the governor's officials to negotiate. She did not come to beg for mercy. She came to make a deal, and she dictated the price. The vast majority of her followers walked free, pardoned. They were allowed to keep what they had taken. Many kept their ships. Some, including Qing himself, were given official rank in the very imperial navy that had spent years hunting them. She surrendered the fleet, and in exchange she kept her freedom, her fortune, and her life. She did not lose. She cashed out. So how does the most powerful pirate in history die? Not on a gallows. Not on a burning deck. She went home to Canton. She lived quietly. She is said to have run a gambling house in her later years, and to have died around 1844, in her late 60s, in her own bed, a grandmother. Think about the full shape of that life. A girl with no recorded name, born on a pleasure boat on the Pearl River, rose to command more men and more ships than Blackbeard, than Henry Morgan, than any of the famous names that Hollywood prefers to remember. She stared down 3 empires. And then she was wise enough to leave the table while she was still ahead, and to spend her final decades in peace. History loves the pirates who died spectacularly. It tends to overlook the one who simply won. And maybe that is the quiet lesson buried in her story, that the hardest victory is not seizing power. It is knowing the exact moment to let it go. If you enjoyed sitting with the story of someone history almost forgot, then stay a while. This is a place for quiet stories of remarkable lives, told slowly, the way they deserve. Rest well, and we'll see you in the next one.